Good evening, I'm Lyndon McIntyre. Tonight we depart from the traditional format of the Fifth Estate for a story from where I grew up, where I worked for years as a reporter, wrote 3 books about the people and the place, and yet could never have imagined what I'm about to tell. It's how an international crisis in the Roman Catholic Church touched down like a tornado, leaving faithful Catholics convinced that the criminal behavior of a handful of their priests has been compounded by betrayal. Well, I grew up in Cape Breton. I went to school in Cape Breton, was a practicing Catholic in the traditional sense, worked here as a newspaper reporter. I have a house here that I use in the summer months. And when I get here, people invariably say, "When did you come home?" I was aware that sexual abuse had been a factor around here. Sexual abuse has led to the destruction of people's lives. People have killed themselves. I wondered how far I could go as a reporter to tell that story before I was into realms where people would be unwilling to talk and I would be into speculation. I decided that I would explore it myself and try to do it from a fictional point of view. Then I found out in the course of doing the book that a priest I knew, right handy here, was a horrific sexual abuser of both boys and girls. I didn't know that, and it came as a horrific shock to me. Sexual abuse is probably the most profoundly damaging betrayal that anybody can experience, because it always happens with someone who is known and trusted. And there can be no greater betrayal than the betrayal of someone who is about as trusted as you can humanly be. And around here, that's a Catholic priest.
Father Hugh MacDonald made his first court appearance to face 23 sex-related charges.
Momberket pleaded guilty to sexual assault and was sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Today, another lawsuit was filed.
We had cases where 4 in particular priests were charged and convicted of sexual abuse. These weren't priests who were found in one parish, caught there, and prosecuted. These were priests who were routinely moved around among a number of parishes. So it was kind of like a plague that traveled through the diocese.
He'd call and say to my mom, "I need something done at the church." It was usually me that he asked for. In the beginning, it felt very natural for him to want to give you a hug. When the hugs became different, then an unease set in. It was like, is this something that's really happening? Am I imagining this? When things progressed further than that, it was like, I can't believe this just happened.
Where am I at? If I run outside the door, will anybody help me? Can I scream? Will I be heard? All these thoughts were going through my mind as he was abusing me. Everything good in me was taken out, and it was just like put into a blender. How do you exist after that?
I hated myself. All my pictures, I scraped the faces off them. I didn't want no reminder as a kid. So I got rid of them all.
One of those prosecuted, probably one of the worst abusers in the diocese, was a man who came to our home when I was a kid growing up. He was my uncle's parish priest in the northern part of Cape Breton at the time, and my uncle would bring him to the house, and he was a gregarious, friendly guy who loved music and loved to drink. And everyone thought what a down-to-earth, fine priest he was. Turned out that he was a serial abuser who created havoc all over this place.
We were a large family. We were 14 kids. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was a coal miner. And we were what we considered your average coal mining family. I think UV befriended my mother right away. He got in good terms with her. She trusted him. She felt that this was a good place for her kids to be involved with. The abuse took place here in the church, next door at the rectory, and in his vehicle.
What prevented you from going to your father or mother?
I hear other people say, I went home and I told right away, and they got a slap across the face and never to say that again. Don't you dare say that about this godly priest. And I think that's what I felt like. I was betraying somebody with this. Not he was betraying somebody, but I was betraying somebody with this. And I felt that if I told, that one, either I wouldn't be believed, or two, I would probably get a good whipping and sent back anyway. I was so fearful of people finding that out that I said, I'll never tell anybody this.
And this fear persisted until you were a grown-up man,
Yeah.
married with children.
Yeah, and in my late teens, I many times thought about how I could take my own life without, make it look like an accident and no one would ever know. I'd have my father's car and coming over the new bridge in New Waterford and thinking, if I just go off the road, I'll die. Accident, no one will ever know. That's how serious I was about nobody knowing that secret. Because he couldn't live with that secret anymore about the abuse from Father UV MacDonald. I was so broken by what I just heard because I thought, had I exposed that secret many, many years ago, then my brother would still be alive. That's how I felt at that point in time. And I've struggled with that for many, many years. I promised my brother that I would make sure that the people responsible for his abuse, and I thought his death, would pay for that, and that would be the Catholic Church of the diocese.
Father Hugh MacDonald made his first court appearance. The 80-year-old priest returned voluntarily to Cape Breton from Ontario to face 23 sex-related charges.
He eventually died before being held accountable for what he had done.
Father MacDonald, any comment on the charges, sir?
Some people could have said, well, I've tried. We laid criminal charges and we did what we could. But Ron took that obligation to his brother so seriously that he felt he had to do something.
A man whose brother killed himself 6 years ago is spearheading a suit against the Diocese of Antigonish.
The three things that I want this to do was to get that accountability, to get some type of peace for those victims who had come forward, and to free the people who have never come forward.
Are we talking dozens? Are we talking hundreds?
More than 100 people have filed claims under the class action process. Almost 140 claims were filed.
The big surprise was that the bishop of the day, Raymond Lahey, was more than anxious to reach an amicable settlement. I guess in religious terms, the victims and the lawyers were looking for a confession that bad things had happened thanks to the misbehavior of some priests, and they wanted an act of contrition that would take the form of some kind of material compensation. And they found that Bishop Lahey was ready to reach some kind of an agreement without a whole lot of pain.
He was championing this process, and he was able to speak about it with that kind of passion and that kind of belief.
They typically fight these claims vigorously. So to have someone in authority say, we want to find a better way, that was incredibly refreshing.
Over the course of 5 years, I really felt that this guy was decent. And I felt really at peace with signing that settlement with him on that day.
The Roman Catholic Diocese of Antigonish has agreed to pay up to $13 million to people who were sexually abused by any of its priests.
I want them to know how terribly sorry we are, how wrong this abuse was, and how we are now trying to right these past wrongs.
Shortly after the big settlement, I happened to be on a reporting assignment in California when somebody contacted me by BlackBerry asking me if I could suggest someone in Antigonish Diocese who could give a reasonable and official comment on the fact that Bishop Raymond Lahey had just been arrested. I thought it was a joke. Sad to say, it was no joke.
Today, police say that Bishop Lahey is facing child pornography charges.
Do you have anything to say to your parishioner, sir?
What was your response when you found out what he was facing?
Well, disbelief. You know, the man that you're working with, the man that you're talking to several times a week, the man that you're seeing regularly at meetings and events is not the man that I'm hearing about. It was the watershed event in the past 2 years of this diocese, and it's going to be, I think, for some years to come. It changed almost everything.
Well, the big change was that a number of sexual abuse survivors decided that they wanted no part of the settlement that Bishop Lahey had negotiated. It was tainted as far as they were concerned. And they launched their own lawsuits against the diocese, and they were insisting that this time they would name and shame the priests that molested them. One of them was a Father Alan MacDonald, who was running amok among the children in a parish just a few miles from where I grew up.
Today, another lawsuit was filed. Philip Latimer says as a boy, he was abused by a priest in his hometown of Harvabushi. He considered accepting compensation under a settlement recently negotiated by Lahey in a separate class action suit, but decided to launch his own suit when he learned about Lahey's arrest.
When the man that orchestrated the deal was no different than the man that committed the crime, that did it. That did it for me. I could have took their money and nobody'd be none the wiser. My neighbor wouldn't know a thing. And you know what? That would have suited my character at the time, right? By taking the money and nobody knowing anything. Because I didn't want anybody to know anything in the past. But now I'm not afraid of people knowing everything. But that's what the diocese is afraid of, people knowing everything. I want the floodgates to open. You'd be at the church as an altar boy, and afterwards he'd ask you down to the house. He would give us alcohol and pizza and possibly ask us down to watch a hockey game. Eventually you'd find yourself there alone. The only thing I can remember is looking at the ceiling and just begging for this not to happen. There's many victims that can't come forward because they can't even today speak about it. They live in silent horror. There's men in the past from Harbour-Bushy and other areas that has committed suicide, that has died in a drunken car accident. But the question is, why?
After it came out when my brother went through it, right, on TV, it just totally made me start thinking about it all the time.
So it didn't necessarily have a good effect when Philip started?
No.
It just threw you right back into it?
Yeah.
And what happened?
Well, I started drinking a lot more and started doing some drugs and that, and I was thinking back like I could have been a better father. And
so how low did it get? You tried to kill yourself. What Antigonish Diocese has added to the discussion is this whole question of accountability. Who will pay for the remediation of crime? Right now it looks like the people who are obliged to pay are the people who are perhaps less able to pay than any other diocese that I can think of in the country.
They have come from parish to parish to collect monies.
Why pick on the lowest members of the totem pole? It would be much easier if we went up the pole and went to the Vatican and say, sell one of those statues, sell one of those pictures.
Coal during the 50s and 60s symbolized the vulnerability and the dependence of the Cape Breton economy. Today, it's acquired an entirely new symbolic value. It's the rock upon which a sound economic future can be built.
When I worked here as a reporter in the early 70s, there were 10,000 people working in the steel plant here, associated construction, the coal industry, the manufacture of coke, which was the fuel for the steel industry. 10,000 jobs, none of which remain today.
As far as world-scale steel production is concerned, we're now spectators at a game that's been postponed indefinitely.
In a single generation, the geography that is enclosed by the Diocese of Antigonish has lost its three principal economic mainstays: coal, mining, steel making, and the ground fishery. This, of course, translates into an economic problem that exacerbates the burden that has been placed on the Catholic population of this area to come up with $18.5 million at last count to compensate people who were victims of sexual abuse over the last half century.
This is an open letter to His Excellency Bishop Raymond J. Leahy. Your Excellency, the Diocese of Antigonish had agreed to a multi-million-dollar settlement in a class action lawsuit involving victims of abuse by its own Roman Catholic priests. On a small island such as Almadam, where the jobs are few and far between, it's a total mess to find out that the sum of $159,263.09 has been taken away to pay for the settlement of the sex abuse victims. What prompted me to write the letters was the fact that the onus was on us to pay. I wasn't pleased. So then I decided I was going to go public and write letters, and I've written many.
What happens if a parish says, go away, Father Paul.
Well, they have said it. Some places, and not parishes, but individuals have certainly said, go away. This is not our problem. It's not my problem. You shouldn't be doing this to my parish.
Don't get me wrong. I totally agree that they should be compensated. That is a must. But to use the smaller churches where our ancestors have given everything they had, and my parents, monies that they didn't have, to keep their church going and to make their community a better place to live, I think, no, that's wrong.
Welcome to another Cayley here at the Mabu Community Centre, and of course Tuesdays mean more great traditional Scottish music.
I know in the last years the hall committee looks after keeping the hall maintained, and not a penny comes from the parish. It's a crucial centre. Practically everything we have here, we have it in the hall.
Tell me about how the church got built.
They decided to build a new church here because the population, just exploded for a while.
Right.
So the carpenters came in, and the stonemason was Rankin, that's Donald Rankin. He put the foundation in, and all the work was done for nothing.
I've known Daniel Rankin all my life pretty well. Daniel was a school teacher for many years. He was active in his community. He served in municipal politics. He ran for the Conservatives. I think he does have the gumption to say what a lot of people think.
The idea of, this is great, we'll be able to buy our hall back. I just believe, what the hell are we buying our hall back for when we owned it in the first place?
That's the...
And I'm not moving away from that.
How will this change, though, the relationship, do you think, between the church and the people in the communities?
I don't think it'll ever change the relationship if you have a good relationship with your local priest. For many of them, it has nothing to do with them or any wrongdoing on their part. But it certainly will change our attitude towards the church in the wider, and certainly towards Rome.
For them to say that, okay, well, this is what we're going to be doing, and it doesn't involve any cost to them at all, when really the entire cost of the settlement you could take from a painting down in the Vatican and sell it, and that would be it. Instead, you're beggaring every small church in the area to do it.
This is the stuff that is really challenging for people.
Am
but
I
the
hearing
answers,
sympathy?
I don't have
Am I
any
hearing
answers.
sympathy from Father Abbas?
Sure. Sure you would have your sympathy for me. I mean, these are good people. They feel that everything is closing in around them, that all kinds of things are being asked of them. And when they turn around and say, well, where do we look for a little bit of help? It's very difficult to stand in front of people as a priest and say, because Rome won't do it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Murphy. There's a change of leadership tonight in a troubled Catholic diocese. Right now, a new bishop is being installed in Antigonish.
There will be lots of difficulties, lots of trials, but I have a great sense of hope.
Now, the elephant in the room, wherever this conversation happens, is what about Rome? How come it is not taking a particular interest in this particular problem?
Well, I think we need to, keep the understanding of how the church is organized. The whole church is divided into dioceses, and one of those dioceses would be the Diocese of Rome, whose bishop is the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and he also has some role in terms of the rest of the diocese. But in terms of Rome providing financial support, for instance, it's like saying something happened here in Antigonish. Well, how come Archdiocese of Halifax is not helping out? Well, it's our problem in a sense, So
In my books, the Vatican is right at the top of that entity. And the archdiocese and the diocese, they were all responsible for what happened. So they have to take responsibility.
I've had lots of people in the diocese who have come to me and said, look, we absolutely 100% support what you're doing, but we don't think we should have to pay for it. And my answer to that is, neither do I. We have a very rich establishment. Rome has all kinds of money. And I think, they are ultimately responsible,
They go down to the lowest members of the totem pole and take money. It would be much easier if we went up the pole and went to the Vatican and went to those Taliban wing of the Catholic Church and say, sell one of those statues, sell one of those pictures.
What is the situation in terms of Vatican liability for crimes committed by people who are directly beneath them in the hierarchy?
Liability means that there's some kind of relationship, such as this is the employer, this is the employee. Like that kind of language doesn't work in terms of church. I'm not the employee of the Vatican.
But they appointed you.
Yeah, well, so in terms of the appointment of bishops, certainly it comes from Rome, but it also is rooted in the local church as well, in the sense that names are collected locally. Rome then goes through a whole process of consultation on the local level, and then they make the appointment.
All roads, as we uncover these crimes, lead to Rome, lead to the Vatican. All of it. Father Maciel started the Legion of Christ in the 40s in Mexico and became a worldwide inspiration to youth in ministry and formed seminaries across the world. At the same time he recruited all these seminarians, he abused them regularly and repeatedly. This kid depicted here with John Paul II is Father Maciel's biological son, whom he abused for 10 years from ages 7 to 17. And the reality is the Vatican chose to ignore it because Maciel was raising money worldwide and funneling it to the Vatican.
The search for legal remedies almost everywhere except here has been the diocesan level. You're going in the other direction.
Well, Cardinal Ratzinger is now Pope Benedict, and our focus on him as the Pope is on the station and the power of that office that has misused and abused that power when it comes to child protection.
But the legal reality ends at the diocesan level.
Well, I don't agree with the proposition that the legal reality ends at the corporation of the bishop. It is the corporation of the bishop that is created by the Vatican, and it is the Vatican to whom they answer. Until they are held accountable, they will be the ones responsible for the ongoing, continued, worldwide cover-up of clerical sexual abuse.
They've never succeeded in stamping out sexual abuse of minors in the Church's 2,000-year history. The first evidence of any type of legislation or awareness comes from a council that took place in Spain in a town called Elvira, and that was in 309. There's a document from 1866 that imposed absolute secrecy on any investigation or church prosecution of cases involving any form of sexual abuse. In 1922, the Vatican issued a procedural decree. Everyone involved, from the time the investigation began, was bound by what was called at that time the secret of the Holy Office, which was the highest form of secrecy or confidentiality in the Catholic Church. Those procedures were replaced in 2001 by another one, issued by the present Pope when he was head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The difference was this was made public, but the processes themselves are still enshrouded in complete and absolute secrecy.
I wanted to ask you a question about Father Maciel. Can you talk about?
I'm not so informed.
He became upset when I tried to ask him about the Maciel case in 2002 and slapped my hands. There's a question whether you covered up.
No, a moment.
No, there's a question whether you.
Come to me.
when the moment is given. Not yet.
Well, we tried to... That had to be one of the most extraordinary media ambushes of all time. A reporter from ABC News trying to get a comment from the Cardinal who, for more than 20 years, enforced the policy of secrecy regarding sexual abuse cases. Then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict XVI.
I think his response while he was in the congregation was appalling. If he saw these reports, which he did, many of them were when priests wanted to be laicized, they would describe all of this in the report. Nothing was ever done.
If in fact Cardinal Ratzinger was reading the reports that were crossing his desk during the 80s, one of the first and worst of the storms that the Church would be facing in the 90s and in the early part of the new millennium came from Canada.
The Winter Commission traveled to every parish where priests abused children, poured through church records, talked to experts and victims, discovered a hierarchy that had ignored, downplayed, or covered up the abuse.
How can we help heal the hurt and anger that we know is here? And how, in the name of God, can we prevent it from happening again?
The Winter Commission. Sister Nuala Kenny was a member of that. Now she's taken it to Canadian bishops, hoping to revive its work.
From that study of what happened in Newfoundland, we understood that there were deeper systemic issues that allowed it to happen, that allowed it to go on for so long, that allowed the kind of responses that had occurred to occur. This issue won't let me sleep some nights. I didn't expect to be here. I don't even want to be dealing with this issue at the moment, but I can't do any other because I think it is serious. I have a very analytic kind of approach to things and I draw concept maps. It looks kind of a convoluted mess, but that's how complex this is. You circle issues that were relevant to the topic at hand, and then you try to see where they relate. For example, if you look at the power one, the secrecy and denial comes from different practices and systematic kind of cultural issues. If there's one thing I want to do is to help our bishops understand, head down, avoiding scandal has resulted in the greatest scandal in the history of the modern church.
This week, we heard reports of a priest abusing deaf boys at a school in the United States.
Police have raided the headquarters of the Belgian Catholic Church in Brussels.
There are allegations the Pope himself turned a blind eye to the sexual abuse of children by priests.
The crisis stretches the breadth of the continent, and it's reached inside the Pope's native Germany.
The Justice Minister here accused the Vatican of obstructing investigations into the alleged abuse.
From evidence that I have seen, what typically happened when a bishop found out that a priest had been sexually abusing children, he would usually admonish him very privately and send him to another assignment.
I dread coming here now because it brings back such a flood of emotions. It's steeped with tradition for me, it's steeped with history, and yet it's got a lot of pain.
Hugh Vincent MacDonald ended up in New Waterford because one of my client's mothers met with the bishop and said, Hugh Vincent MacDonald sexually abused my child. Like most families in Cape Breton, she had a cousin who was a priest. She called her cousin. Her cousin arranged a meeting with the bishop, Bishop Power, and she met personally with Bishop Power to see what should be done about this. Bishop Power convinced her not to go to the police and said he would take care of it, and he did. He moved Hugh Vincent to New Waterford.
To St. Agnes.
To St. Agnes, where he met Ron Martin and David Martin and many others.
Explain to me the rationale by which bishops would move sexual offenders around within a parish rather than just taking them to the local police station.
I think there certainly were mistakes made in those years where they weren't where priests were moved around. But I think recently now in our legal settlement, we've made a real effort to try to rectify that situation, so that if any kind of charge comes up nowadays, then there's no sense of moving around any priests. They're taken out of ministry.
But is it really accurate to say it was a mistake? I mean, this was policy.
Well, I don't know if it was a policy in the sense of moving around people who have been offending.
There were directives from the Vatican. You are not to go to the civil authorities. You're to avoid scandal.
Certainly there was a focus on trying to look at the whole sense of the church and avoiding scandal there. And that may have been one of our faults.
Responding to the situation has not been easy. It was sometimes very badly handled. I acknowledge the pain which the Church in America has experienced. In recent months, the Church in Ireland has been severely shaken as a result of the child abuse crisis. I also acknowledge with you the shame and humiliation which all of us have suffered because of these sins.
This Pope has been open to apology, but that's words. Actions speak louder than words. And we're now in the U.S. Supreme Court. And some are daunted by it, I'm not. There are legal impediments that the Vatican has thrown up, and they will continue to throw up, and they'll claim an immunity because they're a sovereign, you can't sue them. But you can hold sovereigns responsible, such as the Vatican, for international violations of human rights, systematic cover-up of crimes, such as slavery, genocide, and sexual abuse. And in this case, that's exactly what we have, the systematic cover-up of rape of children.
The American courts have consistently supported Anderson's position that, sovereign or not, the Vatican is legally accountable, a position recently validated by the U.S. Supreme Court in what could turn out to be a legal landmark, maybe even here.
I don't think the importance can really adequately be imagined or described today, because I think this is opening the door to some very, very serious issues for the institutional church. I think it's gravely important.
This is about a spiritual, cultural transformation in the church. There's no small thing here.
As far as the church itself and donating, never again.
A crisis in the Diocese of Antigonish has the potential to resonate far and wide within the church, because it introduces a word that has always been pretty abstract in the relationship between Catholics and the Roman Catholic hierarchy, and that word is accountability. I think people in the pews will demand accountability, and lawyers are going to start to demand a greater degree of accountability that will be surprising and foreign to the culture of this institution.
People are saying already, very, very clearly, we want a new structure. So we want our parishes, we in our parishes want to have more control, more ownership, and more of a stake in what happens.
As laity, we were controlled by our priests, and that thankfully is over, or I shouldn't say over, but it's getting less and less.
This is about a spiritual, cultural transformation in the church. There's no small thing here. I think there are more and more people who are making a mental split between their faith and the church in ways that they've never done before. Their faith is not shaken, but boy, the credibility of the church is at stake here.
I feel so sad for the abuse victims, and I feel kind of angered towards the hierarchy. All along, they knew what was going on, they were aware of what was going on, and they were moving the priests from parish to parish to repeat the offenses that they were doing. And when I found that out, well, I made a decision that I was not going to take part in that church anymore. Unless there are major, major changes, I will watch Mass for shut-ins from my apartment.
Au nom du Père et du Fils et du Saint-Esprit.
My faith is my rock, but as far as the church itself and donating, never again will I give another cent. And the reason for that is that if I did that, in my heart, I would feel that I'm accepting what they're doing as being right. And for me, it's wrong.
We're trying our best, and that's why, you know, for my part, whenever I'm engaged in this, and you asked me earlier on, how do I work it in my head, I just have to keep coming back to, but this is about victims.
I go every Sunday because I believe in the Eucharist. We're a Eucharistic church, and that's why I go. Church sometimes for me is the loneliest place in the world. I feel absolutely isolated in that place. But I'm still gonna go because in the end of this, I still want to be Catholic, I think.